Dodgy Dave.
So in this segment, we're going to be talking about David Cameron and Greensill again, and the fact that the Greensill's collapse could cost the UK taxpayer up to £5 billion. And we'll talk about why, a bit into the video, but this is just, I'm getting sick of talking about David Cameron and Greensill, to be honest. Why this lender decided to start giving out so many loans, especially during a pandemic as well. This is just such a ridiculous story. And this is such a ridiculous situation as well. The fact that the taxpayer, once again, is being asked to cough up because of the decisions of dodgy lenders. I'm getting sick of this story, to be honest. The failure of Greensill Capital will cost the UK taxpayer up to £5 billion, a parliamentary inquiry has heard, as one expert said the lender's business model was as close to fraud as you could imagine. Okay, so remember that, as close to fraud as you could imagine. Some people have called it a Ponzi scheme. Okay, so let's talk about something else quickly. So more context for this story. So Dishi Rishi is facing questions over why failed finance firm Greensill Capital was chosen to give out the emergency COVID loans despite not being regulated as stringently as banks. So there are companies that relied on Greensill Capital for loans, but this firm was not regulated like banks were, because banks don't typically make money like Greensill Capital does. What Greensill does is they give out loans and they sell off those loans to other companies, bundle them up, sell them off, the debt, to other companies with a fee. Banks don't typically do that. So why was a company like Greensill allowed to give out COVID loans? And then when things started going wrong, they turned around and went to the Treasury. They went to the Bank of England and said, "Oh, can you buy off this debt for us, sir? Can you buy it off for us? Can you give us some of them COVID loans?" Despite the fact that they're giving COVID loans to people. Like, why are you borrowing money from the government and then also still lending money to people? Why? We've spoken about this story a lot. I've done long videos on it, but Greensill Capital, which counted David Cameron as a senior advisor, was the only non-bank financial firm that was chosen by the government to administer the emergency COVID loan schemes. Why? Why were they chosen? The firm went bust weeks ago, which left UK taxpayers on the hook for hundreds of millions of pounds of loans. It's far more than that, we found out. Greensill was not subject to the same stress tests as other banks, which sees firms tested by the Bank of England on whether they would be able to stay afloat in an economic crisis, and we know that Greensill couldn't. And the fact that because they couldn't stay afloat, it's going to cost the taxpayer up to £5 billion. It comes as Germany's private banking association today said it has paid out around £2.7 billion, $3.17 billion. Surprised that I have the 2.7 billion euros and $3.17 billion to more than 250,000 Greensill customers as part of this deposit guarantee scheme after the bank collapse last month. The association said only a few customers had received compensation under the protection fund, which protects individuals and not institutional investors. So these were people who, I think, invested money into Greensill, and then because the bank has a scheme which protects investors, this bank had to pay out 2.7 billion euros. Crazy numbers. I don't think it's a specific bank, sorry. I think it's an association of banks by the looks of things. I'm sure someone will clarify that in the comments, and I'd appreciate it if you could. Don't know too much about the German banking industry. So let's not forget here, as close to fraud as you can imagine, the former City Minister Paul Miners said the government could end up footing the bill of unpaid state-backed loans and social support for thousands of steel workers whose jobs are currently at risk of one of Greensill's largest borrowers, Liberty Capital, owned by metals magnate Sanjeev Gupta. He's an interesting character, and we know that if this steel company goes bankrupt, then it's going to cost a lot of jobs and also the UK's ability to manufacture steel, which it could use in infrastructure projects. The estimate was shared during the Treasury Select Committee's first fact-gathering session as part of the inquiry into Greensill's collapse. It is one of the 4 parliamentary inquiries into the firm's failure, which has sparked concern about undeclared government lobbying by former officials following David Cameron's attempt to influence on Greensill's behalf and the lack of regulation of supply chain financing. So this will, hopefully some good will come out of this in terms of more regulations and more kind of rules against lobbying. But it speaks volumes that our former Prime Minister David Cameron is lobbying on behalf of a very dodgy company that has been called, quote, a Ponzi scheme and as close to fraud as you could imagine. That's our former Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen. That's Dodgy Dave. Lord Minor said, who was giving evidence alongside university professors and former Treasurer Nicholas Macpherson said he believed the taxpayer would be left to cover as much as £1 billion in unpaid loans, including those lent to Gupta's business, a billionaire in his own right. Miners said the ultimate bill could be in the region of £3 to £5 billion once the wider impact had been taken into account. So once again, the taxpayers are on the hook because of dodgy financial lending. Have we learnt nothing from 2008? Honestly. It's actually going to cost a lot more if you count the externalities, the indirect costs, the cost of having to rescue the steel industry from its saviour, Mr. Gupta, the cost of dealing with the social implications of the closure plant. So I think he's talking about potential welfare and other support payments that would have to be made to people and their families because of the loss of jobs and other things, if necessary, or the net present value of upfront subsidies to keep the steel industry in its current form operating, he said. So overall, he's saying it could cost 3 to 5 billion, but directly it will cost 1 billion so far. So, anyways, Gupta sprawling holdings company AFG Alliance, which owns Liberty Steel, relied heavily on Greensill's financing and reportedly owed the lender £3.6 billion when it collapsed. So, a lot of the kind of liability was on this firm by the sounds of it. And why was Greensill financing a steel company which I think has been struggling for a while now? Why was Greensill pumping so much money into this company? And then they turned around to the Bank of England and asked the Bank of England to buy up this debt, which shows you how dodgy Greensill were. The group has so far failed to find new funding, forcing Gupta to pause production at UK factories to preserve cash last month, so I can see them going under. The billionaire, who's currently in Dubai, even requested a £170 million bailout last month, which was ultimately rebuffed over transparency concerns and fears that he would funnel the money out of the UK. So, incredibly nice man, this Gupta fella sounds like. The company's relationship with Greensill has also come under scrutiny after overclaims that Greensill was offering loans to AFG Alliance and other borrowers based on speculative invoices that names customers it has never had done business with. So, this company, Greensill, were giving loans to a very dodgy company here in this AFG Alliance group. Incredibly dodgy, that they were claiming to do business with people and customers that didn't even exist. These loans were then backed by non-existent trades, were then packaged up and sold to investors at Credit Suisse as so-called securitized assets. So they were saying to these other companies that, look, these these loans are good that we've given out. You could buy up this debt. It's all secure. Everything's good here, and you can buy them off us. Why you would do a business model based off buying debt? These guys sound like they're potential vulture capitalists as well, so maybe they did get a bit of what they deserve, but at the same time, no one should be able to set up a business model where you give cheap loans to people and then sell off that debt, because surely the interest rate is going to go up anyways. It's very stupid what's going on here. So Dr. Richard Bruce, a supply chain expert from the University of Sheffield Management School, said, that is, I think, as close to fraud as you can imagine, really, because you're trying to deceive me into believing that it's a security when there isn't. Greensill was effectively trying to convince people that these assets were securitized when they weren't. This is just ridiculous. The GFG Alliance refutes any suggestion of wrongdoing. Again, the more kind of Parliament and committees and experts kind of look over this, the more information we'll have. Greensill is facing criminal complaints by Germany's financial regulator, BaFin, which says Greensill's local bank could not provide evidence of receivables on its balance sheet. Prosecutors raided the homes of 5 Greensill bankers who are suspected of possible wrongdoing last week. So the Germans are actually doing far more than the British are in this respect, not to mention the fact that our former Prime Minister worked for Greensill. Did I forget to mention that? Lord Macpherson took aim at persistent lobbying efforts by Greensill Capital, which involved dispatching David Cameron, his special advisor, to contact former colleagues. Cameron controversially contacted Rishi Rishi, as we mentioned before, on his private mobile at the end of the pandemic last year and pushed officials across the Treasury and Bank of England to give Greensill access to the government's largest COVID loan scheme, which would have involved bending the rules. But the question is, why was this company allowed to give out loans when they turned around and started begging money from the Treasury and the Bank of England? Surely alarm bells should have started ringing at that point in the Treasury, saying, why have we allowed this company to start giving out money when they're begging for money themselves? Ridiculous. It led to 9 virtual meetings between Greensill and the government officials, who ultimately rebuffed the lender's requests. Another question is, are you general member of the public who may own a business or may needed help? Did you have access to government ministers and members of the Bank of England to help you when you were struggling during the pandemic, if you were? The answer is no. But yet David Cameron did, which shows you how bad lobbying is in this country. It's slightly disappointing that officials' time were wasted when there was a valuable commodity because of a wider crisis, McPherson said. But a spokesperson for Dave said, was not on the Greensill board, who was not on the Greensill board and was not on the credit or risk committees. He emphatically did not think that the company was in danger of collapse. Surely, if you're a special advisor for this company, you would have to know the details of this company to give them good advice. It's just a ridiculous thing to say. A spokesperson added that the Treasury's Permanent Secretary, Charles Roxburgh, told the Public Accounts Committee last week that considerations of the Greensill proposals were not disproportionate use at all. Sounds like they were. And also we know that the COVID contracts, the VIP lane, actually took up loads of time compared to the kind of checks on the other people who were trying to bid for contracts from the government. So I wouldn't be surprised if David Cameron was causing issues time-wise by asking for all these loans and access to ministers, Treasury officials and Bank of England officials. I would not be surprised. But it's just such a ridiculous statement to make that, Greensill's time was not a disproportionate waste of time, because it was. Because you're talking to a guy who couldn't get the loans that they wanted and then had to beg and go to officials directly to ask them to bend the rules. Are you telling me that's not a disproportionate waste of time? You could have used that time for other things, to help out other businesses, to look at other solutions for the economy. Nah, you wasted it on David Cameron. Don't give me that. It wasn't a waste of it. It wasn't a disproportionate use of time. Shut up. Greensill administrators at Grant Thornton declined to comment. So, in conclusion, what can we learn from this? This company, Greensill Capital, looked very dodgy, being called as close to fraud as you could imagine and a Ponzi scheme. They were allowed to give out government, they were allowed to be a lender on behalf of the government, by the looks of things, to, give out loans to companies, and they were not regulated as stringently as the banks were, which, is a red flag in itself. It's just a red flag in itself. We also know that Greensill collapsed. They're being investigated by German officials. Also the fact that they were begging money from the Treasury and the Bank of England. The fact that they had lent so much money to this guy Gupta. The guy Gupta owed them, £3.6 billion. This thing keeps giving me notifications. What more can we say apart from Dodgy Dave strikes again? And rest in peace, Greensill. A dodgy company, ran by, advised by Dodgy Dave. There has to be new rules around lobbying and around, these sorts of companies existing, because what his business plan was just selling off debt, giving loans, selling off debt. Also the fact that they were selling securities. They were claiming that these loans were secure when the company they were lending to had non-existent finance, non-existent work going for them, doing business with people who didn't actually exist. Very dodgy in itself. And I think that if it's the case that they were selling things as securities when they weren't, that does sound maybe like fraud, and so maybe they'll be investigated for that. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Dodgy Dave.